Hey, my name is Buck Downs. I'm a poet and a writer and a writing consultant here in Washington, D.C. There was really a moment where poetry sort of appeared and came to put everything into focus. Came to really sort of kind of became the keystone of the arch. 2 or 3 times in my life, I've kind of had these sort of mini nervous breakdowns where I just kind of stopped writing for about 6 months and just sort of and then really kind of started rebuilding the process from zero and just kind of getting back into a routine. The first time that happened was like in '93 when I stopped drinking. I mean, obviously I had a lot of stuff to kind of clear off my desk.
Sure. Hello and welcome everyone to the Pilot Waves podcast. My name is Alex Vidalis. I am the host of the Pilot Waves podcast, and for those of you listening for the first time, or maybe you're listening for the 20th time and just would love a reminder, the Pilot Waves podcast is about artistry, it's about technology, it's about community, it's about commerce. We ask that artists and musicians come on our show and tell their personal stories as they meander in those sort of worlds. We ask for them to come on, tell their personal stories, because then their success is embedded within us and the community, and our success is embedded within them as well. We do believe this. We believe it with our whole heart, and we think that if you listen for some time, you will start to believe it as well. You will go to these shows, you will go meet these performers, you will introduce yourself. You will say things like, "I heard you on the Pilot Waves podcast." That would greatly help the show. I don't know if I've ever mentioned anything like that, but that would be fantastic. We had our greatest amount of listens in the history last week. We are starting to be in the neighborhood of, I guess, about 6,000 to 7,000 a month, which isn't massive, but think about that. What would you do with the power of that kind of community? It would be great if you would even just reach out to me and say hello. But right now, listen to Buck Downs, which is who this interview is about. It's not all about me and the Pilot Waves. It's about the people on the show, like Buck Downs. Listen to this interview. I just went on and on there. I'm so sorry.
My sisters taught me to read like when I was 3 and
Really?
sort of went into school with this kind of, like, like when you can read really well, people make the mistake of thinking you're smart.
Yeah.
So I got to coast for a long time, like starting elementary school, kind of reading at this 6th or 8th grade level,
Right.
and seeming to be this like really smart kid who was
Right.
just as kind of confused and messed up as everybody.
Like Harvey Pekar.
Mm-hmm, exactly.
Did you ever read his The Quitter?
Yeah.
He's like, I was just really good at memorizing shit.
And so reading and writing has kind of been with me for as long as memory.
Right.
And it really is kind of tied to memory in a very basic way for me. And so then, those 20 years, childhood and growing up, was really trying to find my place in writing.
Right.
And being a story writer, novel person didn't really seem to work for me, and everything else didn't seem to kind of work. Writing songs and being in a band, or trying to do comedy, or doing improv and things like that. Like none of those other kinds of writing seemed to really work for me. And so, but then I found this thing of poetry, and it really kind of brought it all home.
Have you ever had, even recently or far enough back that you still remember, of where you're like, I can't do this anymore, or I don't want to do this anymore, I want to do something else?
Oh, I have probably 2 or 3 times in my life, I've kind of had these sort of mini nervous breakdowns where I just kind of stopped writing for about 6 months and just sort of and then really kind of started rebuilding the process from zero and just kind of getting back into a routine. The first time that happened was like in '93 when I stopped drinking. I mean, obviously I had a lot of stuff to kind of clear off my desk.
Sure.
When you stop a habit like that. And so, there was like this kind of 6 months where I was just kind of concentrating on getting to work and not drinking and sort of adjusting my lifestyle. And I was not writing anything that I was particularly happy with, and so I was like, fuck this. Let's just quit for a little while.
Right.
And if it's gonna come back, it's gonna come back. And so that would have been like June through November, something like that. Just like no writing.
Right.
And then it started to slowly build back up, and that happened again in like 2002, of just a time where it's like, okay, it's time to kind of like tie a ribbon on all the old shit and kind of clean out and find a 0 point and build back up from there.
Right on.
So it happened. It's happened twice now, and I kind of am wondering, because I haven't written really much of anything all summer. Like, am I in the middle of one right now? Could be. I don't know. But yeah, I'm still like taking notes and starting to put some things together. So I have hope that I'll be writing again real soon.
Well, I know even if you're not writing, I know you've got some appearances discussing some past writing. Mm-hmm. What do you have coming up?
Yeah, so I've got 3 things happening in September. On the 11th, I'll be reading at Zed's Coffee House up in right where DC becomes Silver Spring. They're on Georgia Avenue.
It's my favorite part of the city.
Yeah, I love that. And then you get up above Walter Reed, and there's some beautiful neighborhoods right around there. On the 18th, I'll be in Philadelphia reading at the Philalia Conference, and you can find out information about that at philalia.com. There's going to be a lot of great Philly poets and poets from elsewhere coming in there, that town. And then the weekend after that, on the 25th, I'll be reading at Upshur Street Books, and I'll be opening for one of my favorite bands in D.C., which is a roots music group called Ballad Of. I've been fans of theirs for a couple of years now, so that's going to be great to do like a poetry music thing at that bookstore.
Tell me about DC. Tell me about, you specifically talked about how the interesting people you said it's important to give it to the right people for feedback. Mm-hmm. What's like a hallmark of the right person versus the wrong person? Well,
it's just people that I've met and developed relationships with. Like I said, this postcard list seems pretty large at about 200 people, but they're all people that I've met in person, and we've talked about poetry, and they are like a first audience for me, and every month I'll send those postcards out. 2 or 3 people will write back, and you might, like if you were expecting sort of everyone, like expecting all 200 people to be like, no, that doesn't happen. What happens is like that poem like really speaks to a handful of people out of those 200. It's a different handful of people every month, but it really speaks to them, and so they come back, and it's, and that is a kind of a feedback and a dialogue that's really valuable to me, in a way that, sending poems to a literary magazine and getting a form rejection letter, or even like a form acceptance letter, or even a letter that's not a form, from somebody who's kind of a stranger, and who's just kind of like, sort of writing about their own predilections and prejudices, in the guise of like giving me feedback.
Sure.
Like just having a word of encouragement from a friend is worth 1,000 of those.
Right, of course.
Yeah. And so that's why it's great to be in a city where there is where I can say my poetry gang.
Right.
It's great to have like a practice where I'm actually sharing tangible poem objects with a specific list of people. Right. Like those things are really gratifying, and they're really what make the practice sustainable and make it keep growing itself.
The community is always such a big part, because even if it's small, there's only so many people you can talk to in a day anyways.
That's right.
If it's a small community, it's still, if it's engaged, it's always going to be such an amazing boost to you, creatively, professionally, personally, all those things. Yeah. Tell me about some of the interesting areas. Where do you go to feel a little bit of that creative fire?
I kind of miss the DC that was here when I moved here, even though you have to be kind of glad that it got built, that the DC we have here got built. It was kind of a woolly Wild West sort of place, so there are so many opportunities now to just go and check out stuff, and I still love the U Street Strip. Velvet Lounge is a place where I go to hear bands. I'm always loving to go hear like smaller bands and guys who are just getting started. The Black Squirrel has become the kind of Poets Bar for the last couple of years since they got started up on 18th Street. You can always find some portion of the gang there on Thursday nights, sort of drinking the stout beer and holding forth on poetry and the world and whatever. So that's and it's always been great. Before we congregated at the Black Squirrel, we used to congregate at Stoney's down on L Street. We used to congregate at Mr. Egan's, which is no longer there. It's funny to have been sort of hanging out in night spots in D.C. long enough that there are just like almost every place has a new name now.
So tell me about some of the things that you did differently, let's say 15, 20 years ago. Mm-hmm. What's the difference between you as a poet now versus you as a poet then? Is there a discernible difference?
Well, probably the place that I'm at right now is having sort of made this bet with myself that if you trust the language and let it run the race, everything's going to turn out better than okay. And that's sort of a wager that I made with myself probably 20 years ago. And over the last decade, yes, more and more. Just let the language run. As you're talking about, it's just words. We're not. They're not going to actually hurt anybody. And so that has been the thing. Like more and more, I find that, if I try and sit down as a regular practice, like I'm going to write about this now. That turns out to be like kind of long-winded and boring and tedious stuff. But if I just am trying to capture these perceptions and these thoughts, write them down as quickly as I can with no embellishment, don't worry about sentence structure, just grab the image and set it down. That has become a really powerful way of writing for me.
Do you think, so taking it back, that 20 years ago, what would you say to yourself then? Would you have changed anything, or do you think it was still valuable for you to have done things differently at that point?
You got to do what you got to do. If I could go back in time 20 years and tell my younger self to relax, I think my younger self would be like, "Fuck off!
Yeah,
don't tell me what to do.
I'm trying to fucking change the world here."
And so so it's that would be the thing of like, you were right. Go ahead and make that wager. Let the language have its head. And everything's going to work out all right. And, but that's, you can't really know that, and like if I just showed up to tell my old self about that, I don't know that my old self would necessarily see me as a trustworthy individual.
If someone, an interviewer say, were to go to you and just say, well, what do you do it for? Why do you do it all?
This is a sanity management tool.
Right.
This is really about, I have this crazy tornado of language going on up in my head, and if I keep it up in my head, I'm going to burst. And that is really, I have come to find out before and after, above and beyond everything else, just sort of like getting to see what I think by getting it out here at arm's length has been a valuable tool, a continuing lesson for me intellectually, emotionally, spiritually, practically. And so that's what the poetry is really all about, is sort of like getting this crazy tornado out of my head and into some kind of form where I can look at it and be happy with it.
A tornado of language. Buck is talking about, the idea of getting things out of your brain, because if you didn't, you'd probably go crazy. I think that's something that we can all relate to. When I was reflecting upon this interview, or listening to it, I guess, and reflecting on it at the same time because I had listened to it a few times, I was definitely struck by how he really makes it sound like such a mechanical process. And I know Buck has emotions. Obviously, he's not a robot or anything of that sort. But if you focus more on the recording of it in the moment, as he sort of says, then it doesn't have to, the emotional ups and downs don't sway you as much. Do you still have moments of rebelling? Do you still have moments where you're trying to tear something down, or do you find yourself more somewhere else these days?
I mean, I think the impulse is there, and I mean, we live in such crazy times, but then we always have. We've always lived in times where if you just want to be like a regular guy living your life, there are powerful forces fucking with you above your head every day, and wanting to change that, I think, is just like a natural emotional reaction to the kind of imperfect state of the world. And but really I'm kind of plugged into a community of artists. I'm plugged into a spiritual community here in Washington. Like a lot of the kind of emotional, psychological needs that I have are being met by the community around me. And so it really becomes much more an idea of what can I do that will be productive and also help eradicate some of the trouble, so much trouble that's around. But what can I do as a person in a community of fellows and make that thing work?
Where do you find for you, like, what speaks to you in terms of getting involved with the community?
I've been a volunteer and very involved in the DC Arts Center almost since its founding 25 years ago. And so being involved in the arts community, being involved particularly with an organization that is devoted to grassroots new artists, underserved populations, and giving them gallery space and theater space in which to show their work. DCAC has been a place where many Washington artists have had a first show and then went on to do great things in their careers. And so that's been really powerful for me. Being in the kind of poetry gang that I'm in, the sort of dozen or 20 or so of my peers who are running around town and putting on readings and doing events and stuff, like the stuff that you would kind of find online at dcpoetry.com,
right,
which is the website that we all kind of hold in common. That's a great experience, and in fact, like a really powerful one to have fellow writers to socialize with.
Where can if someone were gonna just start kicking it with your gang, and maybe not your gang but another gang, where do they go? You said dcpoetry.com. Where else can people go to get information?
They can find a lot of good stuff. And there's links there. And there are, my poetry gang is not the only poetry gang in Washington, which is, again, another one of the great things about Washington. Being in a city of this size, we have a automatic kind of diversity, heterogeneity kind of built in. There are lots of exciting things that are going to be coming up. Split This Rock will be doing great things in the fall and in the spring. That's a great that's a great event to go meet poets at. Busboys and Poets is doing like open mic stuff every night of the week.
Oh, wow.
And so that's a great place to go and like meet some peers and maybe develop some working relationships with other writers. My gang does readings in about 3 or 4 different locations around town, and you can always find them posted at dcpoetry.com. And there is just a lot of opportunity to build relationships and build kind of a creative group, creative ensemble that you can socialize in and talk about this life. When I moved here, it took me almost a year and a half to kind of like find those people. Like if somebody's listening today, maybe this is like they're in like their first 9 months in DC or something, and they're like, oh man, when am I ever going to find?
Statistics would probably agree with you. I think so many people moving in.
It's just going to take time. It just takes time. You go out to some events, and and you go to some, and you're kind of like, my God, what did I just go to? But then, like I say, it took me a year and a half. It took me from like August of '88 to June of 1990 to really sort of like click and find some people that were kind of speaking the same language and that we felt simpatico about the whole poetry project.
For someone who's been in the city for a while, you've obviously seen a lot of changes, and I know you made reference to there's some improvements. There's definitely, no one's going to deny that there aren't some things that are better now than there were 20 years ago. For the love of goodness, there were multiple people getting shot on a daily basis for a while. It was pretty fucked up. But the makeup of the city is changing. Do you find it artistically changing? Do you find anything different on your end with your group? Like, are people moving in? Are people moving out? Is the scene getting bigger? Is it getting smaller?
It has always waxed and waned. Washington has had a really strong kind of community for poetry like the kind that I'm writing, this kind of like let the language run the show kind of writing. And when I moved here, it had kind of gone to an ebb point. Like a lot of people had moved out of town or found jobs that were very demanding and things like that. And so in the early 90s, getting involved with, with some of my peers and really kind of priming the pump on the scene, getting our poetry scene in motion again. So it has waxed and waned like that. Right now we're in pretty great shape. I had been curating a reading series at the DC Arts Center for a few years and handed it off to 2 younger poets who are doing a great job with it. And it's like really awesome to just kind of hand that off to the next generation and know that it's going to keep going for a few more years, until they get ready to hand it off to someone. I have always been entertained by what I have been able to find right here in DC. There have always been like exciting bands and great new writers. And the names kind of change and people come in and out. For several years, the writing program out at George Mason was and really remains like a really strong resource for writing here in DC. They are just, there are a lot of really talented students coming into that program, and a lot of them are finding their way into town, which is really great for me. It's sort of, I think everybody who goes into any kind of MFA program or arts program in a university setting, it's real tempting to just kind of like stay in the hothouse, to kind of be there with your workshop peers, and it's exciting and it's fun. And for someone who's just like a little townie like me, right, I'm kind of missing out on that energy. So when those people will make the effort to come into town and interact with me and my townie pals, it's really great for us. We get a real great interchange of that energy and that enthusiasm.
To shift gears a little bit, if I said to you, what's the hardest piece of work you ever had to put out, what comes to mind?
Letterpress printing for a book of my own, and it was time consuming, and it's grueling labor to sit there with a case of type and one little piece of lead, one letter at a time, setting type for 48 pages of your own work. And you can learn a lot about economy and brevity when you look down after 4 hours and it's like, oh, I still have a lot to do here.
Oh shit.
So that's but that was a piece of really sort of learning about language and sort of like getting it down to that single letter on a little lead slug, and going through that experience was really a lot about but it's hard work, but it's really super gratifying to do that kind of printing of your own work.
What about not from a physical or a laborious standpoint? What about from like an emotional standpoint? What's been the hardest piece, or just a hard piece that comes to mind?
One of the things I've been working on since like 2002 is having a process that's really actually easy. And so like the hard work is the things that are hard are actually sort of the post-writing part. That's the part that remains challenging and difficult and can be frustrating. Like you say, I only use 10% of the raw material I write, but somehow that waste of time, so-called, is not frustrating to me. But making like 10 phone calls and sending out 20 emails to try and put together like a series of readings and getting like 2 responses, that's that feels like that is like a frustrating thing that would lead you to think like, what am I doing, wasting my time here? So like the whole care and maintenance of an artistic life is really the hard part, right? Taking care of your work, sharing it with the right people, taking care of yourself, learning the difference between self-care and self-indulgence.
Ooh, yeah.
I'm someone who's much more wired to indulge myself than to take care of myself.
Yeah,
And so really,
feel that.
I don't think I'm the only one.
Yeah.
You know, so it's just
Nothing makes me want to reward more than a reward. You know?
yeah, that's right, my man.
So this is a special shout out to my friend Robert from 10 Questions. Robert, you remember how you said in the Don Z episode, there's a nervous laughter I had. Oh, and if you want me to mention you by name in an episode sometime, you should interact with me. culture@pilowaves.com is a place where you can email us at the Pilot Waves, Alex Vidalis specifically. You know, or Chelsea Short, if you have feedback for her episodes, you could probably email us that way too. Tweet us at Pilot Waves or Facebook, of course, the Pilot Waves podcast. Robert, this is for you. In the Don Z episode, you said that there's some nervous laughter that where Don like pegged me as like someone, or I pegged myself. I was like, oh yeah, he's speaking right to me with that comment. If you want to hear the comment, you should listen to that episode. In that last segment, the part about when he says, or I said, nothing makes me want to reward more than reward. I don't know why. Just decided to admit that in front of everyone. Who doesn't love a reward? A drinky poo, or just a vacation? You know, why not? What do you think? Remember, Facebook, tweet us, all that stuff. Thanks for joining us. It's good to have you. Was there a time that you decided to be a writer?
You know, there was really a moment where poetry sort of appeared and came to put everything into focus. Came to really sort of find us, you know, kind of became the keystone of the arch that I was able to pass through. I had been knocking around in school and in college, you know, story writing and journalism and performance and things like that, and just sort of at the end of my junior year of college, I had sort of gotten exposed to modern poetry and found this thing that was really congenial for me. Just sort of the intense focus of a single page of text became this real liberating thing for me. Like, you're going to get to the bottom of the page and you're going to be done. So make it count. You know, and that was really a clarifying moment for me. And everything else since has kind of revolved around the poetry as a core practice.
I like the idea of you make it count, because is there a sense of urgency when you're creating your art to be succinct within a certain amount of time?
Yeah, you know, I gravitate towards these smaller forms. One of the things that I've done for many years now is I mail out a monthly poetry postcard to about 200 people, mostly in the U.S., but some international. And so you've got this, you know, 4 1/4 by 6 1/4 space. You know, that's it. So there, you know, that practice itself has reinforced my natural tendency to go towards shorter forms. You know, because you've just got that little space of ground to fill up, and so every word is at a premium.
When every word is a premium, how do you? Does it ever pain you to take away words, to lose words?
It actually kind of liberates me a lot of times. I mean, I have found. Like, I don't really rewrite. You know, I kind of write something down and it's either right or wrong. Most of the time it's just plain wrong. And it just stays in the notebook, and that's its little home for the rest of time. And so it's actually like when I look at a piece of a poem that's not working and I can just say, you know, I'm going to live without that. That's a liberating, kind of freeing thing. And I think it makes for like a cleaner poem. You know, instead of laboring to try and fix something, just take the broken part out.
Do you, well, with the amount of years, because you're a little bit more of a veteran
Mm-hmm.
in terms of poetry and writing, and is there a defined process that you have, or are you still do you shoot from the hip? How do you go about it?
I do this really kind of crazy, elaborate combination thing. You know, it starts with always having a notebook, always having a capture system. You know, I have this, I think I'm not the only one. I have these things like I talk to myself and my brain is constantly generating like crazy thoughts, and I kind of sometimes think I hear voices and things like that. So the first thing is catch all of that. Catch as much of that as you can. And then that notebook gets filled up, and then it gets typed up completely. You know, and there's an idea sort of, let's just suspend judgment. Let's not worry about whether this is insane or stupid or awesome or whatever. Just type it all up. And then from there, with the kind of processing tools that we have today, cut and paste, manipulating that type draft is a really powerful tool to just sort of rearrange all of those thoughts, look for the patterns, and find the places where they kind of begin and end, and let the language itself kind of run the race.
Mm-hmm. Are you always on? Are you always recording, or do you have to actually tell yourself sometimes, no, just enjoy the moment, do not write anything down?
I do all of that. I think I'm just like everybody else. I make the mistake of being, I don't need to write that down, I'm going to remember that, and then there it goes. And then other times, and there are times when I just have to, I've got to put the pen back in the pocket and just enjoy the show for a few minutes and not worry about catching it all. But at the same time, I find that if I can do it quickly and kind of without being too much of a show about it, like, stop everything while I record this thought. If I can just sort of write it down, get it on and get it done, then it's off my mind. If it was like a really great idea, I'm going to think about it all night long, right, which is going to impair my ability to have conversations with you or anyone else. Right. Because I'm going to be sort of obsessed about this awesome line of poetry, of which there are millions, right? So write it down, forget about it, right, and then come back to it with fresh eyes, a month later, and see if it still looks that awesome.
Have you ever written a work about someone that actually was about someone, and then you shared it with them directly? Have you ever done that?
It has been a while, and I actually I talk about this kind of wild cut and paste thing, but yeah, a couple of times a year, an occasion does come up, and you write a poem that's for someone, or you write a piece that's for someone, and those are always like great. Those are like great little gifts to give people, and in fact like a great gift to give yourself. To understand that there are things that you can give that are not sort of polished commodities, finished products, and that they are just this kind of basic expression of a striving for a connection between people.
Is it? Have you? You said that maybe a while back you did that,
mm-hmm.
But was there ever a time that the young buck was writing poetry as like a love offering to anyone? Did you do that?
The postcard practice that I was talking about before really came out of it kind of scaled up from a time where I was doing I would sort of type up poems on kind of sticky labels and then put them on a postcard and like mail them off to like my friend Brett down in New Orleans. The woman I was dating at the time, Helen, like all these different people, and it would be like I didn't keep a copy of that.
Right.
It was just like there was a rough draft and a type draft, and the type draft got a stamp on it and it got put in the mail, and the rough draft got thrown away.
Wow.
And it was just like this this thing about just giving that to that person,
right,
and not sort of hedging my bets. And that was a great process for me to go through, of that, again, not hedging my bets and not being able to go back and fix it later. You just send it, just put it in the mail and pray that it'll get there, and pray that they'll like it.
Is there a very first poem that you ever wrote once you started taking it real seriously?
There is, and it is somewhere. It was very fun. It's funny to tell some more of that story, right? Like I kind of wrote that poem, and I think it's out there online. It eventually got published somewhere, and I was kind of like, I think this could work for me. And like a month later, I had like 6 poems, and so that was in like May and June, and I spent that summer like obsessively like rewriting like those 6 poems that eventually became like 10 poems, but just like not really knowing what to do, and so just like, just copy it out by hand again, and just kind of an obsessive practice from not really having enough poetry to do anything with it. Yeah. And so where is that story leading? Just that those early poems, I worked so hard and got so little. I mean, it's not like I got nothing. I got a finished poem. Mm-hmm. But, I worked on it for like 40 hours.
Right.
Why not just work on it for an hour?
Yeah. Again, the nervous laughter. Why not just work on it for an hour instead of 40 hours and end up with the same song or the same poem or all that stuff? On today's episode, some of the highlights for me, if you're going to take some takeaways, take some takeaways. The importance of having a process is definitely up there. Just record things at all times. Worry about sorting it out later. And as Buck said, trust the language. Trust the language to be, good enough. He worded it better than I did, but that's a great takeaway. Another thing, he mentions again the idea of the importance of having a circle, a group of people that you can share and get feedback from, or just sit around and enjoy some stout and bullshit. It's great stuff. I think, we all feel that. That's the clip that I posted on the SoundCloud that resonated the most with everyone was the discussion of the Chocolate City Burlesque and Cabaret, the importance of having a tribe. That and the clip about earning a living through using the cabaret. So listen, what's the most important thing? The most important thing, as always, remember, be good to each other, and please join us next time. Looking forward to it. Oh, and DC Podfest, everyone, if you haven't already, check out DC Podfest on Facebook, November 6th through the 8th, and we have some live shows. The live show coming up on September 18th, How Could I Forget? And of course, how could I forget? Special love goes to my muse, Amanda Kleiman. Thank you for all your support. Good night.